Second, just starting recording now. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's session of change notifications with Graph API. I'm looking at two-way syncing of bookings between Dataverse and Outlook. So today's session is brought to us by Antti Pajunen, and Antti is a really well-known member of the community. He's also an MVP, actually based, I believe, in Finland. So I really appreciate him taking time to actually share this with us today. Please ensure that you are muted. He will be able to respond to questions at the end, so please put them in the chat. And yeah, Antti, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, so let's think of questions first. This is going to be very fast-paced and very intense. I would say this is like if we look at Microsoft levels of learning, this is definitely level 400, if not beyond. I would actually say that if you have any questions, especially right now, I can't see if someone's has that hands up thingy in Teams. I can't see it on my screen right now, so just interrupt me and ask a question. I have a bunch of flows for a live demo, so just interrupt me and ask me. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to go back at the end. So. But with that, yeah, the like Tricia said, Tricia, thanks for having me. The session is about change notifications, really, with Graph API, and I have a Dynamics background, so I'm a CRM guy at heart. So naturally, what I want to do with Graph APIs is something that Microsoft took away from us, and that was syncing bookings between Dynamics 365 and Outlook. So there used to be a way to sync bookings in field service and project service to Outlook. But that thing was deprecated about 2 years ago. And I kind of went on and to find solutions how to do that. And I had an initial version done 1.5 years ago or whatnot. And I kind of came back when I discovered change notifications. I kind of came back to this and thought I'd, see what we can do with change notifications to really make a two-way sync. So with that, like Tricia said, my name is Antti Pajunen. Don't worry, the burden of pronouncing my name is solely on me. I'm a BizApps MVP from Finland, work for a company called Forward Forever. We primarily do Power Platform governance. Now, my history is, like I mentioned, I am a CRM guy at heart. My special niche is in project service automation as well as project operations. I have dived deeper into field service a few years back. I don't actively implement it, but I have a basic understanding and a certification in field service. Whiskey fan and married with 2 kids. That said, I'm actually in our kids' room right now because this is my makeshift office, and they will probably be coming home from school in the next 30 minutes. So let's see if we have hell on earth in 30 minutes or not. All right, so let's get started. And again, I'm going to go through these slides fairly fast, and I have an extensive demo that I need to go through pretty fast as well, because change notifications as a whole, this concept could easily take 2 hours, if not even more, to cover. So the agenda is something as follows. What are we trying to do, and what are the requirements? And then after that, we're going to look at what is Microsoft Graph API, how can we use it, what are change notifications, what can we do with change notifications. There is an extensive demo, and then there is a lessons learned slide as well. And I'm actually going to do the lessons learned before the demo so that I don't have to come back to the PowerPoint deck. And with that, I strongly want to emphasize that what I'm kind of covering here and doing is a concept. It's not a finished framework. It is not a product. It is possibly and probably even not 100% production ready. It would need a few things, would need to be honed out and corrected, but it is a concept. I think it's one of the most complex things I've ever done on this platform, to be honest. Interested to hear your thoughts after the presentation. And with that, let's kind of, get going. So our goals and requirements. Our goals and requirements are really, like I mentioned, Microsoft has taken away an out-of-the-box sync. So our goal is to sync bookings from Dynamics 365. In this case, it is a field service example around work orders from Dynamics 365 to Outlook. And what we also want to do is we want changes in Outlook. So changes in Outlook to be reflected in Dynamics 365. So think of this scenario. I am a dispatcher and I'm booking a field technician to go to a company, customer X, to for break fix, to repair, fix something. That technician gets a call from the customer saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm actually I'm running late. Can we push our booking 30 minutes in advance? Can we do that?" And the technician says, "You know what? I'm flexible. I don't have anything after this in my calendar." And let's say the processes of that company are such that the technician can't actually say that. So he's going to say, or she's going to say, "Yeah, that's fine. Let's push it by 30 minutes." What that technician does is he or she looks at their Outlook and changes their booking to go forward in 30 minutes. Now, what normally happens to the dispatcher? That dispatcher is completely in the dark. They have no idea what's going on because that booking normally does not get synced to Dynamics. So with this solution, that booking changed by that technician gets synced back to Dynamics, and that technician has visibility to the overall situation in their company. What we're not doing is we're not syncing net new bookings from Outlook, so created in Outlook. We're not doing that and syncing that to Dynamics. We're only looking at changed bookings in Outlook, changed, created, updated, or deleted bookings in Dynamics. Deleted bookings in Outlook are fine. So deleted bookings in Outlook lead to deleted bookings in Dynamics. All right, so with that, the Graph API. What is Graph API? So, bunch of awesome text and materials on docs, but it is essentially, how I perceive it is it's that Microsoft 365 endpoint to do things in Microsoft 365 services. So if you've ever worked with Cloud Flows with Power Automate and you've tried to create a booking or an event in your own Outlook, or have used email actions in Power Automate, have played with Planner, these kinds of things, or SharePoint even, those are based on Graph API. So the Graph API exposes the Microsoft 365 world of REST APIs so that we can create, update, and delete things. Events, they're called events in the world of Microsoft resources in the world of Microsoft 365, so that we can create, update, delete resources using Graph API. Things like Delve, Excel, Microsoft Bookings, Teams, OneDrive. Those are examples of services we can use. In this case, we're using Outlook, which is an event resource, calendar events, event resource. That's what we're playing with in this example. So how can we use Graph API? How do we get to it? Well, the simplest way is to use Graph Explorer. So if you have a trial tenant, go to developer.microsoft.com/blah, blah, blah, and fire up Graph Explorer. You have a bunch of sample actions there that you can fire off. And you can really test and play around in the context of your own delegated permissions using Graph Explorer. Now, another tool that we can do trial and error stuff with is Postman. So that's a good way of trying things out in Graph Explorer. And naturally, when we actually go to an implementation and implement stuff that we want to do against Graph API, we can use Power Automate, we can use Logic Apps, Azure Functions, plugins, Procode tools, you name it. So some of the, kind of as an example, some popular API requests that we have are usually related to the user in question. So get my something. So get my profile, my email, my manager, my calendar stuff, my notes, groups in my organization, users in my organization. Stuff like these are popular API requests when we're using Graph. Now, change notifications then. So what are these and how, what's the meaning of these? Well, in the simplest of terms, a change notification is something that says, hey, something happened. I'm going to notify you of that change. Do you want to do something with this notification? An example being that good old AOL sound. I'm sure some of you remember. I can't, mimic it. You've got mail. That one. Yeah, you got mail in your inbox. What do you want to do with that email? Do you want to, do you want to forward it? Do you want to mark it unread? Do you want to set a priority to it automatically? That's change notifications saying that you've got mail. So it's in technical terms, it's it uses a webhook mechanism to deliver change notifications to clients. And as such, we can use Power Automate with change notifications by having a when an HTTP request is received trigger. How are they used? Again, I want to emphasize how are change notifications used, because this is key in understanding them. First, what we're going to do is we're going to subscribe to a resource. And an Outlook event is one of those resources, and that's what we're doing in this demo and this session. So it's that you've got mail example. We're subscribing to an event. That subscription is accepted, and then change notifications are used so that we're creating new events in Outlook. That new email could be, that's a new, let's say that's a new event, and we're going to receive a change notification. Hey, something's happening. We're going to accept that change notification and validate it that it's a valid change notification. And then we're going to run custom logic in, wherever you want to use, basically run it in. I'm using Power Automate. This could and should probably be turned into a pro dev solution where it could be, logic apps or Azure functions, or perhaps plugins in Dataverse as well. So some examples, concrete examples of what we can use with change notification. And some of these examples are, we can react to, group conversations in different Microsoft 365 groups. Again, those Outlook events and messages. I was talking about events like they would be messages in the previous slides, but I guess you get the idea. Events are those calendar things, and messages are, messages are the actual emails, but you get the idea. SharePoint list items. Hey, this could be big. SharePoint people out there, react to SharePoint list items. Something happens in a SharePoint list. Do something with change notifications. React to Microsoft Teams chat messages, Teams presence, even react to do tasks. So lots and lots of cool stuff we can do with them. Now, I think what I really want to emphasize is, while this is all low code, no code possible, and citizen developer, I find the concept of Graph API and change notifications to be at the hardest, in general, at the hardest kind of peak of things we can do on this platform in low code, no code. To me, Graph API is a constant mystery, and voodoo things just happen. So, expectation management in that sense that, start with, if you haven't used it before, baby steps, take baby steps. Do something simple first, play with the Graph Explorer on your browser, and then, kind of graduate from there. There is a Microsoft Learn course on Microsoft Graph, so would encourage you to, look at that if you've not used Graph before. Personally, I'm still slacking. I haven't gone through that course, but, it being out there has to tell about its popularity, of Graph API's popularity. So before we go into the demo, what I really want to do is cover some of the lessons learned, again, so that kind of I don't have to open this PowerPoint up, back up, and then we can just focus on the demo. So there's actually lots of gotchas in this. The whole concept took me, I didn't count days, probably somewhere between 15 and 20 days to make, probably at least 15. So the first thing that I would do is I would really, create all of this that I'm talking about with, if we're going to go to production with Pro Code tools. This is a good example, and it was a good eye opener for me to realize what we can do in low code, no code. And it's a good example of what we can, of a kind of concept we can build. But to actually do what I'm going to show you in that demo, to do that for a customer, I would just hand this to a developer and just use code to build it, because there's just so many things that really can't be done in no code, low code. One of those has to do with throttling. And I'm not saying we can't do this in no code, low code, but it's definitely a lot more feasible and I guess easier to do in pro code. Flow throttles fairly easily. So if we shove in, let's say 7,000 continuous runs, or fire off flow 6, 7, 8,000 times, you're going to see throttling. And with throttling, you have that risk that it just doesn't recover from throttling. And what I mean by that is actually, it's technical. The Logic Apps engine underneath tries to retry 10 times. And after that, it just says, forget about it. And if that happens, then you don't have transaction consistency. So throttling is an issue in higher volumes. And this solution is definitely prone for higher volumes in bigger organizations. That said, I would probably use pro-code tools to create some sort of batching logic that would keep us right under the service protection limit so that we could avoid throttling. And another thing is that if we look at multi-day bookings, and multi-day bookings are something where on the schedule board, where when we create bookings, I think it was in certain views, was it the monthly and weekly and monthly views? When we create a booking, Dynamics actually, it doesn't create a single record, but it creates multiple records. And if you think of an application like Project Service and you book a consultant for 6 months, I think you're going to get for 6 months, you'll probably get somewhere around 100 and 120 off the top of my head, bookable resource booking records created in Dynamics. And that's, you're not going to want to push 120 of those into Outlook and have 120 separate calendar events in your Outlook. That sounds really crazy. You want a single consistent record, but that's not the way that it works on Dynamics side, because we don't have booking headers in use anymore. So this works for concepts where I, as a field technician, I'm going out to the customer and I have a single booking for a single day. But for project service and projects, if I have 120 bookings in my or a booking for 6 months and have 120 records in Outlook, I don't want that. I don't want that as a user. Azure AD app security roles, important. And then I'm using something called open extensions. Actually, I'm going to check on time real quick. We're good. Open extensions. An open extension is something that adds properties to a resource, to a Graph API resource. So if you think of the way we customize Dataverse, we add columns these days, fields or columns these days. We need an extra field / column. We add that. In the world of Microsoft 365, that's, you don't just go in and add something like we do in Dataverse. But if you need to add a new property, then you can use what are known as either schema extensions or open extensions. Use an extension to add new properties to it, and that's what I'm doing here. And one of those things is that open extensions doesn't support OData filtering. That makes it a bit more difficult. And then a nasty bug that that's a known issue that I'm still kind of investigating is that sometimes when we use those open extensions, when we do a post to Graph API to the event resource, that just fails. It fails, but it still creates the event. And there's really no way to recover from that unless we, create the event without the extension and then update the event with the extension. Now I'm getting super technical, but things like these. So lots of things to kind of iron out. All right. So with that, let's jump in to the multiple systems and see how this actually goes. I think this would be a really good point to, and I'm going to turn off my camera now and so that I can see Teams easily as well. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask, unmute yourselves if you have any. I'm going to look at the chat as well. All right, so Dave Harris, I'm particularly interested in how this might work with invites from D365, if at all. I'm not a developer, but I will follow along as best as I can. I'm not a dev either, so don't worry, Dave. If you can elaborate, what do you mean by invites from D665? What do you mean by invites? Well, feel free to unmute yourself if you hear me, or you can just write in chat as well. So let's start with a demo. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a booking in field service first. Or actually, let's actually take a step back. Let's see how we can subscribe to those change notifications. We have 25 minutes to go, so I do have time to show this. So the first thing that we need to do is subscribe to those change notifications. So how have I solved that? Well, what I'm doing here is I've actually extended the concept of a bookable resource in Dynamics. So bookable resource is something, oh, come on, I don't want to hear anything from you. Bookable resources is something that we use in Dynamics to book people. So what I have done is I have an option set here that says sync with Exchange, allowed or not allowed. So when I set this to allowed, a flow will fire off, and let me show you that flow. I'm actually not going to unsubscribe now because I don't want to even accidentally do something that would cause me to not to be able to do the demo properly. But what I'm going to do is when I set this option set, whatever it's properly called these days, when I change that, a flow fires off and it looks whether or not I've set the sync to true or false. Now, if it's set to true, then it'll actually create a subscription for change notifications. And if I set that to no, then it will unsubscribe to delete that subscription, unsubscribe from change notifications. So what's the first challenge that we see here? Well, this is the first, really the first kind of point of why pro code, unfortunately, for this. If I smash this between allowed and not allowed, what's going to happen is this flow is going to subscribe to change notifications, unsubscribe, subscribe, unsubscribe. While I can have several notifications active, it would mean that if I have two notifications, if I have subscribed to two notifications against the event resource, everything's going to double. Every single flow is the logic is going to run double, and the logic is already very resource intensive and very heavy. So this would be a pro code example where I would actually want to move this maybe to the ribbon and make sure, or the command bar, and make sure that I'm not able to smash this and just change this as I go, but the flow or that logic would actually need to run before I would be able to change the setting again. So that would be one reason why this is a low code approach. Unfortunately for this one is not the maybe the best approach. So after that subscription has been created, what happens is another flow fires off and validates that subscription. So it's not that you can't just create that subscription and be done with it. You actually need to have it validated. So there's a validation token that you have to look at and then respond back with that validation token. And I've already created a blog post about this and how to do it. And there are a few really excellent articles in the community around this. So this is how we create that subscription to change notifications. So now that we understand that we have allowed for that change notification service to run against my Outlook, what we're going to do is we're going to create a booking, and we have 20 minutes, so we really got to move on, move forward. So I'm going to create a booking in fill service, and let's just call it booking for UKUG. And I think the date that I want to set it to is the 25th, yes, and I want to set it for 9 a.m. and I want to end it. Let's end it at 10 a.m. And I will be creating it for myself, and it is a scheduled booking. And before I save and close out of this, I want to explain these two additional columns right here. So the meaning of these is, and I'll kind of explain, you'll get the idea of these as we dissect the flows in the demo, and when we look at the logic that runs in the background when a new booking is created. So what we need to store is essentially, for that two-way sync to be a reality, we need to store the event ID, which is the ID of that event in Outlook. We need to store that in Dynamics so that we can match a record in Dynamics with an event resource in Outlook. That's one thing. The other field is related to resources when they change. So as I create this booking, and the reality is that maybe I get sick and I can't work tomorrow, and that this dispatcher has to change my bookings for another resource. So just they come here to that booking, they cross me out, and they bring in Jane Doe. What we need to do is we need to create that new booking in Jane Doe's calendar, right? Because she has to be aware of that in her Outlook. But what we also want to do is want to delete the booking from my Outlook. So if I save and close out of this and we open up the bookable resource record in Dynamics, we will soon see that these two fields will be populated. So let's jump in the flow that pushes this booking from Dynamics to Outlook. It is, as you can see, there's really like a bunch of logic here, so I just need to find the right one. It's this one. It did succeed. As you see, sometimes there's that open extension failure that just fails, but for now it did succeed. So let's see what happens in this sync flow. Let's actually open up edit and see what happens. So when a record is created or updated or deleted, actually it's when it's created or updated. I won't go through every single details of these flows because otherwise, like I said, this would take 2 hours. So what we want to do is when that booking is created, we want to look at the SDK message from the trigger. Essentially, the SDK message says, was this a create operation or a delete or an update operation? And for a create operation, what we want to do is want to get that resource that we just added, get that work order, get the user from our Azure AD to get its Azure AD object ID. We're going to create a subject for that booking. Then we need to create some JSON. This is just, don't be overwhelmed by this. This is pretty much a copy paste from docs. So you don't have to know how to type this in. Just copy paste something that's close enough from docs and play with it and go from there. And this is that open extensions part. So I've added an open extension, and this is super important because what this does is this adds the GUID of the bookable resource booking. So it's that identifier, unique identifier in Dynamics. It adds the identifier to that booking in Outlook so that we can query for a specific Outlook event using the GUID from Dynamics. And with that, it really just, it makes a post to Graph. It authenticates using an Azure AD application. I will not cover that because that would be another, 15 minutes to this presentation. And it posts a new event to the user's default calendar. So what we should see here in my calendar is now an event from 9 to 10, which is it's this one. The other one right here is a backup that I've created. So if we look at the bookable resource booking record, which is not that one, maybe it was this one. Yes, we will see the Outlook, the event ID, the ID of the event resource in Outlook right here, and we will see the identifier Azure AD object ID of me in this one for scenarios where I want to change this resource to someone else. So that's one part. So maybe, we could, if someone has any questions at this point, we could cover, because this is the part that covers bookings from Dynamics to Outlook. And what we're going to do next is want to look at how those bookings are updated when we change those in Outlook and how they get synced to Dynamics. So if anyone has any questions right now, please feel free to unmute yourselves. Brief moment of silence. I take that as no questions. All right, so I'm going to move on. And again, please feel free to just interrupt me if you have any questions. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go to my calendar and we will change some details on this event and see what happens. So let's, I think drag and drop these. Drag and drop doesn't work. No, it's going to say edit. That's fine. Let's change this to, obviously I have some small things to adjust, like the time zones. It seems to create it in UTC, but that doesn't matter. So let's change this from 10 to 11. Let's make this change and then let's press save. So 10 to 11. Now what happens at this point is I have now made a change in my Outlook. It's that you've got mail thing. So what happens now is a change notification arrives. And I believe it is this flow. Yes, right here. That will fire off. And some things that you do want to take into consideration here is that, I mentioned that it's very resource intensive. And as you can see, that because of how change notifications with the event resource work, that single event or that booking that I created in Dynamics, that has created a calendar event in Outlook, which is a change notification, right? So it fires off a change notification, which we then need to process and say that, hey, you know what, this is a net new booking. Don't do anything. Otherwise, we'll have an infinite loop at our hands. But the way change notifications actually work, for one reason or the other, is they cause the flows to fire off multiple times, and that is most likely due to the fact that when we post to the event resource in Graph API, some of those properties, when we do a single post, some of those properties are not created in a single transaction, but there are some internal patch operations that happen that update that event. So maybe, just maybe start date is one post, maybe or start and end is one post, and subject is a patch. I don't know, some other things like time zone, maybe that's a patch as well. And that ends up, those internal operations end up firing off change notifications. And that's why for a single booking, we get this many flow runs. And here, this is what you can now think of as problematic when it comes to throttling. So if you take this to enterprise grade organizations and you have, let's say, you're creating bookings for 1,000 people and a day, and just for that one single, technician, at this point you've already gotten 5 flow runs fired off. You will throttle this to death, and that's why this needs a solution where we can control the service protection or operate just under service protection limits to avoid throttling. All right, so I did that change in my Outlook. And if we look at the bookable resource booking, if the flow has succeeded, this should now be from 10 to 11. And yes, it is. So it has changed from 10 to 11. So what has happened right here, not right there, but actually here, is let's go to edit back. I've received that change notification. So Outlook has said, hey, when an HTTP request is received, what I want to do here is I want to process that change notification. That's what it's actually doing. It's responding back to it. Everything's fine. And then it moves on. So we need to do some, let's just call it security stuff first. We have to do a client state match. I will not go into more detail in this. It's described in my blog post and several blog posts in the community. But there's some security stuff that needs to happen so that not just anyone can call this endpoint and do changes into my calendar. So with that, we're doing some compose actions for the change type. We're getting details about the resource. We're doing a compose, for the event information, extension names, and these kinds of things. Environment variables are related to my Azure AD app, so I'm not going to expand that. This switch type has been for trial purposes. There's only one path here. I've left room and a possibility to expand this logic by using a switch. So that's why there's a switch right here. So what we're going to do at this point is, this is where it gets important. We had that change done in our calendar, and we had that change notification run, and we're processing that change notification. So what we need to do is we need to get the event that just happened. So what did just happen in our Outlook? And we need to do some OData queries here to get the open extension information as well. So the open extension cannot be fetched with a simple get blah 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 /events /event ID, but we actually have to expand that query to get the open extension contents in as well. So the next thing we want to do is does the event exist or is it deleted? So if if instead of changing the start and end date, I would have deleted that event, what happens when I delete it? A change notification is fired off, right? So if the event is deleted, what do we want to do? We want to delete that event or delete the corresponding bookable resource booking in Dynamics 365 as well, and actually not delete it, but set it as canceled. So at this point, we would run a child flow that I probably won't have time to dissect with you, but I would run a child flow that would cancel that booking in Dynamics 365. However, because this was a change to the event, which has changed the start and end times. What we now want to do is want to get that GUID of that booking from that open extension. So this is the GUID of that bookable resource booking in Dynamics. And then we do need to check if this event originates from Dynamics 365 or if it originates from Outlook. And an event that originates from Outlook is a net new event. So if I just create a new event in my calendar, maybe it's a personal, like a doctor's appointment, I don't want that to get synced to Dynamics. So that's why we're not supporting any net new events in Outlook. We're just supporting events that have been originally created in Dynamics. So if it's created in Outlook, terminate is canceled. Downside is I'm gonna get I don't have too much in my personal calendar going on because I got two personal calendars, and this one I don't have too much going on, but trust me, I get some change notifications. So as I'm using the default calendar in Outlook, I do get like maybe 10 15 change notifications a day where this flow just fires off and ends up in this path, terminates as canceled, because it's just like it's not related to this demo or anything. So that's again one point where we have a fair amount of flow runs. If we multiply that by 1,000 users, we got 10,000 runs, 10,000 flow runs. Then if you start counting the API calls, we're in the hundreds of thousands for 1,000 users. So you can do the math. It's a lot. It's a lot. So we're at 6 minutes to go. We got plenty of time still. So what we're going to do then is it's not originated from Outlook, the calendar event that we just looked at. We're going to do some JSON parsing. We're going to get to the start and event end date of the event, and then we will again run a child flow. And this child flow will update the event, or this child flow will update the booking in Dynamics 365 based on the event. Has it been a smart move to create so many child flows? That's a yes and no. I mean, this would be a humongous flow if I hadn't created child flows, but I could diagnose things. I can maybe diagnose things a bit faster as I have child flows, but the whole editing experience, at least for me personally, would be simpler if I would have everything here. So that's really up to you. I know that it's like a lot of people say that if the logic is huge, dissected into several different flows, it has pros and cons, to be honest. So what we do want to do is want to look at this child flow. So it's called update a BRB when an event is updated. So it should be, it's not that one. Update a BRB when an event is updated. It's right this one. So what we want to do here, this is that child flow. This is now taking that event from Outlook and updating that in Dynamics. It's running as a child flow. We're getting that bookable resource booking record. We're looking at the start and end dates. Then what we want to do is want to match if the start and end dates in Dynamics match the start and end dates of that of that event. So that's a check that we do want to do. And there's two sides to this flow. Either update the bookable resource booking record without changes to start and end, or update it with changes to start and end. And then what we're going to do is we're going to respond back to Power Apps. So this is what did that update. All right, so now we've sort of covered the create scenario from Dynamics to Outlook, and we've covered the update scenario from Outlook to Dynamics. We have 3 minutes, so we don't have time to cover an update scenario from Dynamics to Outlook. So changing of a resource. We don't have that time to do that. However, what I do want to show you is what can we do when we are deleting a booking. So if I delete my Outlook event right here, it's actually going to set the booking as canceled, or so I recall. But when I delete this booking in Dynamics, how can I delete that? This is actually, it's not a trick question. How can I delete this booking with a no-code approach in Outlook? And I'll give you a brief explanation. When I delete this booking, what I can do in Power Automate is I can have a trigger that fires off on delete. What's that trigger going to leverage? What's that trigger going to give me? What information will I have from that trigger? If someone knows the answer, it's a 10-point question.
The ID?
It really gives us nothing good, to be honest. That's sort of the answer. It doesn't really give us.
Not even the ID?
I don't think it even gives the I don't even think it gives the ID. I don't have that flow ironically built right now. It doesn't give us enough information that we could proceed with just the delete trigger to get information. Actually, you know what, Tricia? I think you might be right that it gets us the ID, but that's all it gets us. And the problem with that is if we have the GUID of the record from Dynamics, what can we do with that in Outlook? How is that GUID going to help us? We have that open extension with the GUID. However, open extensions can't be queried directly.
So
we need the resource, right? We need the resource.
So what you're saying is, like when we create the booking, so for example, if you have a booking created or an appointment created in Outlook, right? Mm-hmm. And we basically use Flow to sync it across, can we actually, because we've got that ID, like when we create it, so we can put that ID somewhere else. So when we actually, like when it's deleted, we should then be able to say, okay, if it's something that's synced, it means that this ID should match.
Right here. Yeah, it's right here. But if I use the delete trigger in Flow, I'm not going to get this. You're right. You got me there for a sec. We're going to get the GUID of this record. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this record and show you what happens. So now that I deleted this, and if I have a flow that runs on delete, it's going to give me this GUID, which leads nowhere because I need the ID that we just saw there of the event. However, that's not in the payload. I'm not going to get that from the delete trigger. So again, pro code, what I need is a pre-image. I need a pre-image of this record so that I can get all that data in. How can I get a pre-image in a low code, no code way? And you can argue if this is low code or no code. So I have to do something low codishly, something nasty for a low code approach. I will need to register a webhook in Dynamics and then use that webhook to get a pre-image. Where do I have that? To get that pre-image, spent a ton of time with this. Wasn't an easy thing to parse. And then based on that pre-image, I will have that event ID. I have a lot of, this is about me showing different things for test purposes. Getting that event ID from that pre-image and then deleting that event. So let's see if this actually fired. I'm 1 minute over. Let's see if this fired off 1 minute ago. It did fire off. So it took the pre-image. It took the pre-image and it deleted the event. And if I look in my calendar, the event is gone. This is the backup one that I had. So there's no way to get a pre-image other than using the event framework, using a plugin, or registering a webhook, and then firing off a flow based on that webhook. So that's how we can achieve that delete scenario as well. All right, so that was we're 2 minutes over. That in a nutshell is it. Naturally, as you can see, there's 2 or 3 different flows yet to dissect, and like I said, the whole logic would, if we really wanted to dive deep into it, it would take a couple hours to go through it. What we essentially did here is we created a booking in Dynamics, synced that to Outlook. We changed that booking in Outlook, synced it back to Dynamics. We then deleted that booking in Dynamics and deleted that matching booking in Outlook. Despite being a few minutes over, Tricia, is the next session on the hour if someone has any questions?
We do have a wee break. So the next session is actually at 1:30. I would perhaps say let's wrap this session up, and then if you do have questions, Antti will be available to answer your questions as you know, whilst you're on the break. So Antti, I'd really like to thank you for your session. It was extremely interesting. And I will also be reaching out to your blog because, you know, can you share your blog URL?
Yes, definitely. I just published part 2 yesterday, and part 2 has a link to part 1. So far I've only written I've covered the concept of subscribing to change notifications and a way of keeping that subscription alive, because that subscription actually expires every three days or whatnot. So I've covered that, and then I've covered the syncing bookings from Dynamics to Outlook. The concept of Outlook to Dynamics is part 3, which I will write at some point. It's an excruciating article to write, an investment of easily 10 hours of my time. So I need to take a breath after part 2 before I write part 3.
Thank you very much for putting that time in and also for speaking about it. And yeah, I really hope everyone enjoyed today's session. The recording will be available next week when I edit it and put it up. So again, everyone wants to come off mute and just give Antti a round of applause to thank him. Thank you so much, Antti. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.